next speaker is Dr. Ruth Valerio. Dr. Ruth Valerio is an environmentalist and theologian, a social activist and author. She's the Global Advocacy and Influencing Director at Tear Fund, and she has a great passion for the Christian faith, for poverty, and for environmental issues. I was just looking at her website a few minutes ago, and I found out that her area of specialization is the intersection between the Christian faith and the environment, of course, and poverty and health. She'll be taking us on the next session, which is entitled Exploring the Link Between the Environment and Health, Our Christian Responsibility. Can I please make welcome Dr. Ruth Valerio. Welcome, Ruth. Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, it is such a privilege to be here with you. It feels so strange to be sitting at my kitchen table in the south of England and talking to you, and I'm so sorry that we're not able to gather together. Looking at your program, it looks so interesting, and I wish that I was with you for these couple of days and could spend time listening to you and learning from the other speakers, but also most importantly, just chatting to all of you who are here as participants and learning from you and hearing more about the work that you're doing and the context that you're in. I know that it would be a rich experience for me. So I'm so sorry that we can't meet in person, but also very happy that I am able so easily to zoom in and to spend this next little while with you. Sounds like you have had a brilliant last session. I was able to listen to some of the professor and what she was saying and hear your questions, and wow, you've had a lot to think about already. And I think we're tackling some big topics over these next couple of days and tackling some big topics this morning. Let me start by sending you greetings from Tear Fund. Tear Fund is an aid and development organisation, and we work in around 50 countries, a number of countries in West Africa. And we want to send you greetings and to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I live, as I said, down in the south of England with my family. I have two teenage and slightly past teenage daughters, and I've been working with Tear Fund for about 3 years, and before that was with an organisation called Arosha, which is a Christian conservation charity. And in England, as you heard, I'm well known as a Bible teacher and a speaker and an author, and writing particularly on the links between justice and environment and our Christian faith. So this morning, I've been asked to look with you at the link between environment and health and our Christian faith. And I actually want to start off by hearing from you via the chat function. I'm so aware that I'm in England, and that is a very different situation and a very different context to you and to where you are living. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the issues that you are seeing when it comes to environment and health? When you look at your community or your church or your country, where do you see that link between environment and health? And maybe where do you see some of the problems as being? I'm going to pause and give you an opportunity to write something in the chat. So please say which country you're from, and then that will give us an idea of the context as well. But I would love us to hear from each other. So where do you see, thank you, where do you see the link between environment and health in your own context? Thank you. A significant problem with waste disposal, sanitation, with all the diseases that leads to in Sierra Leone, the lack of political will, more lip service rather than action, too much filth, looking at Nigeria, and so again, many diseases. And recognising that it's often the poorest who live in those areas. Thank you, speaking from Ghana. Do keep your comments coming. It's great to be able to hear from each other in this way. Sierra Leone, plastic and waste. Yeah, terrible pollution there around Freetown in the cities. Christians being more concerned about building the church and not thinking about the environment that that church is in, and so failing to work on the problem. Destruction of forests and segregation coming from Ghana. Not taken seriously in the church. The racialized problems in South Africa still leading then to environmental problems as well, and you can see the divisions there. Ghana, illegal mining, significant environmental degradation, sanitation again in Ghana. Thank you. Annual flooding in Accra. Really wondering about the link about these things with our faith. Are our leaders being honest? Ignorance about the ecosystem, air pollution and waste management. Brilliant, thank you. There's so many issues there coming through. Yeah, with an attitude that this is the government's responsibility. This isn't something that we should be engaged with as Christians. Ivory Coast, the environment determines our state of health and development. Yes, it does. And political issues arising in the country, and those affect the environment problem. Thank you, that's great. So we're from so many different countries, aren't we? And facing so many different issues, and yet some common threads coming through as well. And in Nigeria, of course, the degradation there from the Niger Delta, with the terrible oil spills that have been happening for decades, and linked there, of course, with poverty and with human rights abuses. Seeing churches beautifully set up, but surrounded by land that is in terrible degradation. Display of foodstuffs in our open markets. Yes, I wonder if particularly some of that might be around meat and animal poaching, animal trafficking. Brilliant, thank you. I'm gonna pause there with reading the things out, but do feel free to keep using that chat function as different things come to you. I wonder if we could start our PowerPoint. It would be helpful. So I've just put up a few images of some of the issues that we are facing, and you have highlighted a number of those already. We, perhaps the most obvious one is climate change. We are facing terrible climatic changes, and that isn't something that is a a theoretical or an academic debate. That is something that is affecting our lives, and it's affecting our health. It's affecting food shortages. In 2017, there were 23 countries that experienced food crises, specifically due to climate and weather conditions. And 2/3 of those countries were in Africa, which affected approximately 32 million people. We know that we are heading for a significantly warmer world. At Tear Fund, we've been talking about climate change and taking action on it, campaigning around it, and helping the communities that we work with respond to the problems associated with climate change for 25, 30 years now. And it came about because we were hearing constantly from the communities where we serve that things are changing. The rains aren't coming, our crops aren't growing. And then when the rains do come, it floods and washes away everything that we've planted. We can't rely on the weather anymore. And as that environment breaks down, as our climate environment breaks down, it impacts our health. We see there's a picture there around pollution. And a number of you mentioned that air pollution is a terrible thing. In West Africa, I know you are experiencing that in many of your cities, both pollution from industrial activity and also from the windblown dust coming from the Saharan desert. And around 90% of people worldwide breathe polluted air. Isn't that incredible? Only 10% of people in the world don't breathe polluted air. Around 7 million people die every year because of air pollution. And research has shown that the number of hospital visits in West Africa due to health problems is closely related in many ways to air pollution. Many hospital visits are around respiratory and skin diseases, and often those are closely linked to air pollution, especially during the rainy season when the number of those cases increases. So we face terrible pollution in the air and also in the water, and we face water issues. Some of you have mentioned that, issues around sanitation and health. And the seas, as a number of you are from countries that have a coastline, we are seeing our seas degraded and our rivers degraded through plastic pollution and through the impact of industry and mining. Someone mentioned illegal mining in Ghana, and that puts terrible pollutants into the rivers, which then flush their way down to the sea. And as we decimate our ocean environment and our sea environment, so we are overfishing and leading to problems with fish stocks. It's something that I wrote about actually in one of my books. One of the big problems with overfishing causing significant damage then to local fishermen who aren't able then to get the fish that they would have relied on. We use bottom trawling methods of huge nets that are dragged across the sea floor. They scoop up everything in sight and absolutely decimate the sea. And then sometimes there are local fishermen who use homemade bombs to destroy an area of the sea so that the dead fish float up to the surface. Or sometimes they may use nets with small holes to catch young fish that haven't grown to maturity. Along the West African coast, you have experienced this with industrial fishing that has exploited the fishing grounds so that local fishermen aren't able to get the fish that they would have done in years gone past. Water pollution has worsened in almost all rivers in Africa. And more than 45 million people will struggle to find enough food across 14 countries because of drought. So we have all of these different intertwining issues of climate and our pollution, pollution of the air, pollution of the water, problems of plastic in the cities that we live in, and then washing down into the rivers and washing down into the seas and into the oceans. And this impacts our health. It increases diseases. It increases the levels of death through flooding from the plastic pollution. And we know that climate change is leading to terrible food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa. Droughts and deforestation have contributed to cocoa production in Ghana. Those of you who are from Ghana, I'm sure you're well aware of this. Ghana, you're the world's second biggest exporter of cocoa, but you are facing problems because of droughts and because of deforestation, which is reducing the amount of cocoa production. So a huge amount of issues that we face here. And our health is impacted when the environment is impacted. We sometimes talk about the natural world as ecosystem services, and we depend on those for our very existence. The natural world provides food and water. It pollinates our plants, it cycles nutrients, it moderates our weather. The natural world provides food and drought and flood and drought mitigation. It protects against soil erosion, it regulates plant pests, and it regulates human disease organisms. The natural world helps to decompose waste. It purifies air and water. It maintains our biodiversity. It does everything that we need in order to be able to live. Globally, these services, I don't really like that language, but globally, these services have been valued at $125 trillion every year. And obviously, they are irreplaceable. Without these services, we can't live, can we? And so we need to be taking care of the environment that we live in. The one slide there, glaringly, that I haven't mentioned, of course, is COVID-19. I'm sitting here working from home in lockdown that is beginning to be lifted. I don't know about all of your situations. And I don't know how the churches that you're a part of are handling this pandemic. But I want to be very clear and say that COVID-19 is not a natural disaster. COVID-19 is a disaster of our own making. It's not a judgment from God that we can blame on God. COVID-19 is a disaster that we have made and that we have brought about. We know that viruses jump species and can get into humans. And as we undertake activities that bring us closer into contact with wild animals, so it becomes more likely for that to happen. So deforestation, industrial agriculture, illegal animal poaching and trading, and wet markets, all of these things are exacerbating the problem. We know already that Ebola, SARS, probably HIV, all came from animals. They're what we call zoonotic diseases. We are the ones at fault for this. And then because of our addiction to flying, even when we've known it's been so environmentally damaging, we have allowed this disease, this virus, to become a global pandemic. So really the desperation of poverty and the greed of wealth have come together to bring about the disaster that we are now living with. And we need to face in to this fact that COVID-19 is that perfect illustration of where environment and human health go hand in hand. Because we have not looked after the environment, our health is being impacted. But then if we can go on to the next slide, with all of the negative side, there is also the positive. And we know that our interaction with the wider natural world can bring us many, not just physical health benefits, but also mental health benefits. And our own mental well-being, if we can just, yeah, lovely, thank you. Our own mental well-being is enhanced when we spend time with the wider natural world. It's been one of the experiences for me being in lockdown that I have drawn on the access I've been able to have just simply in my garden or in a city park, that those things have brought me some comfort during lockdown. And actually, whilst there are all sorts of secular research articles that show the link between being connected to the natural world and our health and our mental well-being, that actually is a biblical thing and a Christian thing. So if we look right back in Genesis 1, when Adam was made, Adam is actually a play on words. So the Hebrew for ground, for earth, is Adamah. So we are earth creatures. We are earthy ones. We are Adam from the Adamah. We are I don't know how else to put it. In English, we are humans from the humus. They're right at the start in how we were created in Genesis 1. We see that we are intricately linked to the wider natural world. We are made from the dust of the earth. And therefore, of course, when we have that connection with the natural world, then our own sense of well-being is enhanced. And when we don't have that connection, then it is detrimental to ourselves. So many, many big problems and issues that we are facing today with the link between, as we see our environment degraded, we see the impact on human health, and we are living very, very vividly with that impact now. And you see it all around you with the plastic pollution that you live in, with the high increase in diseases that are in your hospitals and in your communities, with the problems that your farmers are facing. You see all around you the impact of our lack of care of the environment with human health. So why then, let's go on to that next slide, why then is this a Christian thing? Why is this not just something that our governments should be talking about? Why is this something that we should be talking about in our churches and actively engages and that get engaged with, and that our church leaders and all of us should be involved with? Well, I want to make 3 very simple points, and I think some of them build actually on what you were hearing from the professor before, which isn't a surprise because we have a holistic gospel where all of these things are linked. Environment, racial justice, health, gender, poverty, all of these things are linked. 3 very simple points. 1, because God cares about the world. Now that might seem a simple point, but it's not something that we hear about in our churches. In fact, in many of our churches, we're more likely to hear that God isn't interested in the physical world. It's going to be destroyed and we're going to spend the rest of our days up in heaven somewhere. And God is only interested in spiritual things around praying and our relationship with God and worship and so on. God doesn't care about the world. He's not interested in things that are physical. Well, can I just tell you that is not biblical. Biblically, in Genesis 1:31, we are told that God looked at all that he had made, not only humans. God looked at all that he had made and he said, it is very good. He said, I love it. It's fantastic. Look at what I've made. It's amazing. And this is foundational to our Christian faith, that God loves this world. And therefore, as people who love God, don't we want to care about the things that God has made? Can you imagine if you made something very beautiful? I am actually sitting here, I can see, I should have brought it over so you can see it. I can see a tapestry that I made, a beautiful tapestry of a peacock in the woods, which I spent a long time making, and I think it's very beautiful. Can you imagine if my children took it off the wall and wiped their muddy feet on it? I'd be horrified. Well, I know they won't do that, because they wouldn't dream of doing something like that to something that I love so much. And can we get a new sense of how much God loves this world? And therefore, we want to look after it as an act of love, as an act of worship to God. And because he has asked us to look after it, and I'll come back to that. So fundamentally, absolutely a paradigm shift. Let's ask God to change the glasses, our Christian glasses, and help us to see things differently, that this physical world is something that God cares deeply about. And then secondly, God cares about injustice and people living in poverty. I'm not going to say much about that, because I know that your previous session and some of your other sessions have been talking about that. But that is foundational again to the Christian faith, that God cares about injustice and people living in poverty. And we cannot care about people without caring for the land that they live on, and the seas that they fish in, and the air that they breathe, and the rivers that they live next to. These things are interlinked. So if we want to follow God in caring about injustice and people living in poverty, then we have to care about the environment that people live in. And then thirdly, because we have been created in the image of God. And I know, again, you touched on this in the last session. All people are equal. All people have been made in the image of God. And therefore, it is absolutely wrong that some people, so many people, should be breathing polluted air. It's absolutely wrong that people made in God's image should be living in the middle of piles of plastic, should be suffering from malaria and not able to get the fish that they need. It's absolutely wrong that people created in God's image should not be able to grow the crops that they need in order to sell and to support their family. And part of what it means to be made in God's image is that we have been created to look after the rest of what God has made. We are his image bearers. We are his representatives, his ambassadors. And other people and the wider natural world should look at us and see God in us. Do we demonstrate God when we throw plastic away? Do we demonstrate God when we drive big vehicles that put pollution into the air? Do we demonstrate God when we live in ways that don't take care of this world? Maybe when we live in that way, we defile the image of God that is inside of us. So God cares about this world. He cares about people living in poverty and injustice. And we have been created in the image of God. I want to just finish, then we'll hand over, have some questions, just by the final PowerPoint slide, giving you a few little stories. I won't talk about these very long, of some things that are happening, some of the work that we're supporting in Tear Fund that links these things together. So in Kenya, there's a partner we're working with, where with increased food security and loss of jobs during COVID-19, this partner is supporting communities to build plastic hanging gardens to grow quick growing vegetables for their families, a really innovative way of reusing plastic and enabling people to have fresh, healthy food. In Uganda, again, a partner we've been working with, we've helped them to buy machinery where they can manufacture plastic visors from recycled plastic. And then they are able to sell those into the hospitals to protect frontline workers. And in Nigeria, the Joss Green Centre featured on the news for some of the work that they're doing post-COVID-19. And they're a fantastic centre that works with young people and provides opportunities for them to do innovative things around environmental and economic sustainability, different things that they've got going that generate jobs. So do have a look at them. So there's all sorts of examples that I could give, but just wanted to show you some practical things that are happening. I'm going to pause and give us an opportunity to ask any questions or to make any just comments if you want.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Very, very insightful delivery there. We're really grateful for that. At this point, I want to ask that if anyone has questions, you can simply ask the questions on the questions Q&A section or the chat group. We'll be happy to take your question. But let me just give a quick summary of what you have stated here. So the thrust of this conversation has been that God cares about the world that we live in. It reminds me of Psalm 24 verse 1 says, the earth is the Lord's and its fullness thereof. So, and just as you said in Genesis, God created the world and everything in it, and at the end he saw it and said, this is good. So this includes the environment and everything. So that's the first. The second is that God cares also about injustice and people living in poverty. And the third is that if we have been created by the image of God, which we have, we should also demonstrate that we have been created in God's image by caring about the things God cares about, by caring about the world, by caring about injustice, by also caring about people who live in poverty. So I will start off this session by asking you a question. Do you think the church is aware of this perspective? The church now, I mean the institution, the body of Christ. And why do you think the church is not doing enough to push forward this position of we should also be caring about what God cares for? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it varies in different contexts. So each one of you can talk about your own church situation in the country that you're from. In the UK, I would say this has been changing. So I've been speaking on these things for probably about 25 years now. And for many years felt like I was just pushing water uphill. But I think the church in the UK is beginning to understand that this is part of what it means to be a Christian. It's not a separate issue over there. It's part of an integrated and a holistic gospel. And one of the really encouraging things was that the Archbishop of Canterbury asked me to write his Lent book for him, which is where I was writing about the fish and the West African, the coast and so on, called, I know it's back to front, but called Saying Yes to Life. And the fact that the Archbishop of Canterbury wanted to commission a book on poverty and environment really shows that there's a shift. But I know, and I imagine that most of you are from churches where things aren't changing. And I do think that comes from the sacred secular divide that we have allowed to come in, where we have allowed a non-biblical thinking that says that we have the secular world, the physical world, And then we have the spiritual world, and the physical world is inferior to the physical world. But actually, that's Greek thinking. That's not biblical. It's not Hebrew thinking. The biblical thinking brings all those together. Our physical body is important as much as our spiritual relationship with God, and the physical world is important. So we need to hold these things together. We've separated them for too long. And I think some wrong thinking around eschatology has contributed as well. So the thinking that this world is going to be destroyed and we're going to be spending the rest of our days in some non-physical heaven over here. Again, that's not a biblical picture of the times when Jesus will return and this world will be renewed and transformed. There's so much more I could say about that, and I would just encourage people to look at some of my books where I do much more deeper biblical work, looking at some of the key passages in the Bible around that.
Okay, I have a few more questions here for you. So someone has asked the question, what can the church do about the problems of environmental degradation from experience in Ghana? What can or should the church do about the problem of illegal mining, galamsey, or as it is happening elsewhere, the impact of risk of wet markets? Another question is saying, in your statement, you spoke about COVID-19 being a man-made virus. Is it that scientists made the virus to cause mass death for their own personal interest, or is it that it is not the perspective? Is that the perspective you're coming from or not? And another question says, I think the church in Sierra Leone and in Africa, by extension, lacks professionals with knowledge in this field to be able to meaningfully engage. The next challenge would be to get political powers to shift from their position of lip service into taking action. Can you respond to some of these?
Brilliant. What an amazing set of questions. Wow, I wish we had much longer together. So let me have a look at the first one. What can the church do about the problems of environmental degradation? So I think firstly, we need to begin to teach. So we need to get these issues into our churches and help our congregations to understand where environmental concern is part of the Christian faith. And as we do that, then we can look at practical action that we can take. Looking in Ghana, I know you have a huge problem with environmental mining. My daughter actually spent some time out in Ghana working with pangolins and in the Atiwa forest, and looking at the interlinking with poverty there in the local communities and deforestation and mining and the illegal bushmeat trade and all of that. So I know a little bit about that from her time out there. And linking with the third question, I think there is a role for the church to play in advocacy, in calling for the government to take action. So in terms of Ghana, those of you here who are from Ghana, you need to be pushing your government not to allow illegal mining. The Atiwa forest is a clear example of that. Well, not to allow mining, let alone illegal mining. And illegal mining, we know, comes more from poverty and some of those small-scale mining activities. But then we have the legal mining, which is almost a bigger problem. And I would encourage you to have a look at the work of Arosha Ghana. Let me just type that in there. Who are doing some really good work around that. So let's get this into our churches, and then we can, and as we do that, as part of doing that, as part of the education, we can be finding ways to take action. And it may be on some of these big issues, or if you lack confidence in that, it could just be about getting out into your local community and tidying up. Many of you mentioned that there are churches that are in areas that are covered in plastic and covered in rubbish. Could you as a church get together and do a clear up? work with the local community, work with the local authorities, so that you shame them and they have to take some action. Many, many more examples that I could give, but I'm aware of time. Then thank you. In relation to the second question, no, I am not saying that the virus was made by scientists in order to cause mass deaths. Absolutely, fundamentally not. There is no scientific evidence for that. All the scientific evidence points towards this being what's called a zoonotic disease, most likely came from bats. Which there may have been another species in between bats and humans. Scientists aren't quite sure. At one point they wondered actually if it was pangolins that helped that jump, though it seems that maybe isn't the case now. But the most scientific thinking is that it came from bats in some way. And that's probably as a result of our deforestation. Ebola is probably because of deforestation bringing us into contact with bats. So please, that is not the statement I'm coming from. I'm saying that COVID-19 is happening because of our environmentally destructive activities. Yeah, I really understand that and would encourage you to find ways to build up your knowledge. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to have degrees and doctorates in this. Just do a bit of reading. You might find it helpful to start with some of the books that I've written, or to link in with organisations like Arosha who work in these areas. But find some ways that will work for you. It may be, if anybody has ideas that come from West Africa that you could put in the chat, that would be great. I know there are sources, there are newspapers and articles and journalists who I follow, but I know they're UK specific. So find ways just to build up your knowledge, but you don't have to be a professional. Okay, I'll pause.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those comments. I can see from the chat group, some people say often we see environmental issues as good, but probably off tangential to the church's mission and purpose. We see the go ye into the, to the world and make disciples of all men as the core mandate, and probably looking at environmental issues as secondary. How would you respond to that?
So I go back to my understanding of the gospel and the good news of Jesus, which for me is about relationships. So when I look at how we were created in Genesis 1, I see that we were created to be in relationship with God, absolutely, but also with other people and with the wider natural world. And then the fall in Genesis 3 broke. If you read it through, you will see how it breaks each of those relationships with God, between Adam and Eve, and then with the wider creation. The rest of the Bible then is the story of how God works to put that back to rights, ultimately leading to Jesus, who died, yes, to restore our relationship with God, but the New Testament is very clear that it doesn't end there. Jesus also died in order to restore our relationship with other people. So we know that it is through the cross of Christ that the dividing wall of hostility has been broken down. Read Ephesians. We know Galatians, that because of Jesus, there's no longer slave nor free, male nor female, Jew nor Greek, and so on. Jesus died for the gospel of reconciliation, to reconcile ourselves to God and to other people. And then Colossians 1:15-20 is very clear that Jesus died in order to restore the whole created order to him. It says that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross to restore all things, not only people, but all things to him. And so when we have a gospel that is focused only on my individual relationship with God and your individual relationship with God, yes, that is a central part of the gospel, but it's not the fullness of the gospel. And so I want to be preaching and living out a gospel that demonstrates the fullness of what Jesus came to do. So please let me say, I'm not moving away from evangelism and church planting. I think those things are really important, but I'm asking us to broaden out our understanding of the gospel, and therefore our understanding of what discipleship means and how we live out our faith as Christians.
Thank you very much. Our time is fast spent. I really want to appreciate you for this time, and I'm sure that the engagements will continue. I can see some other comments, but I think the comments from Richard is for Dr. Femi and the team at ICI. These are other matters that may need to be considered internally. I also see comments that say COVID-19 is as a result of our environmental degradation activities. Clearing up the garbage is good. However, a more sustainable action will be to engage the surrounding communities for proper waste management. Thank you so much. I believe that these engagements will continue because the church needs to be awake and alive to its responsibilities, not just to bring in souls into the kingdom of God, but also managing the environment that we have a responsibility while we are still here living on it. Thank you so much one more time. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much. There's so much more we could look at, and I hope I can encourage you to read some of the more biblical thinking around this. But really wonderful to be with you, and I send you every blessing as you go on for the rest of your day.